Welcome back to PoliticallyX. So I want you to imagine you're at a zoo.
Right.
You're there with your 3-year-old. The sun is shining, and you're doing that classic parent pivot.
Oh, yeah. The
Oh,
constant head on a swivel.
exactly. Watching the animals, then watching your kid, just doing these constant low-level threat assessments. And then you glance away for like a fraction of a second, maybe to check your phone or maybe to point out a bird to someone.
Which every parent does.
Right. And in that split second, a complete stranger scoops up your toddler and just hurls them over a barrier,
Ugh. It's hard to even hear.
straight into an enclosure filled with 10 full-grown crocodiles.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like the inciting incident of a horror movie. But what if I told you that not only did this actually happen, but the legal aftermath of the event might be honestly just as baffling as the crime itself?
It really is. The physical reality of the event is terrifying enough, but the layers of bureaucratic procedure and then the massive public outrage that followed, it turns this into a really complex case study of modern society.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today's Deep Dive is built specifically for you, the listener, and we are looking at a highly intense, incredibly disturbing transcript from a YouTube creator named Jake Monroe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this source material is really a collision of two things. On one hand, you have factual reporting about a harrowing incident at a UK zoo. And on the other hand, you have highly charged, politically inflammatory speculation from the creator regarding this perceived total breakdown of law and order.
Right, and it's important to clarify right up front.
Yes, exactly. To be explicitly clear, we are not taking any sides here, and we are not endorsing the YouTuber's views. Our mission today is purely to impartially report on the facts of the event and then analyze the source's arguments about societal trust.
Because it serves as this perfect lens to examine the tension between a legal system that is strictly bound by procedure and a public that is just demanding baseline common sense security. And when those two forces collide, the fallout is rarely pretty.
It never is. But let's ground ourselves in the facts on the ground before we touch all that political fallout. Because the hook here, the most shocking factual nugget right away, is the miraculous survival of the child, and then the totally baffling decision by the justice system regarding the suspect.
Yeah, we have to start with what actually happened.
Right. So the incident took place at a family-run farm and zoo in Cambridgeshire, England. It's called Johnson's of Oldhurst, but locally everyone just calls it Johnson's Zoo.
Mm-hmm.
According to the reports, a 3-year-old boy was thrown into the crocodile enclosure. And I want to stress, this was not an accident. He didn't slip. He was thrown by a 30-year-old stranger who was completely unrelated to the child.
And to really understand the gravity of that, we have to look at the environment. You know, this wasn't like a shallow petting pool.
No, not at all.
This enclosure housed up to 10 crocodiles. And that includes the zoo's two largest, which are named Romeo and Cuddles.
Which is a terrifying name for a massive crocodile, by the way.
Truly. But the sheer drop alone into an environment that is literally designed to contain apex predators, I mean, that is a lethal threat even before the animals react.
But the immediate aftermath is where this story takes a turn into the miraculous. The boy suffered considerable injuries, primarily broken bones, but those were entirely from the sheer drop into the enclosure.
Right.
Astonishingly, those early reports of potential crocodile-related injuries, they were completely false. He was not bitten, not once.
It's unbelievable. And the timing of the rescue is likely what prevented a fatal outcome here. Tracey Johnson, she's the wife of the zoo's owner, reportedly didn't hesitate for a second. She jumped straight into the enclosure to save the child.
Wow.
Yeah, she literally put herself between a bleeding toddler and 10 crocodiles. And then zoo staff quickly moved in and managed to pull the boy to safety. He was airlifted to Adam Brooks Hospital and is currently in critical but stable condition.
You know, I just have to stop right there and look at the sheer mechanics of this event. You're telling me a 30-year-old man was able to get close enough to a toddler, lift him up, and throw him over a barrier designed to keep predators in.
It happens in an instant.
Right. And Monroe used an analogy in the source that really hit home for me. He talks about taking his own kid to the aquarium and how he never takes his eyes off his child for a single second. Because as a parent, you're just hyper aware of the fragility of that space.
Exactly. That hypervigilance is a natural response, but it also relies on this unspoken social contract. When you go to a family zoo, you are mentally preparing for the risk of, you know, a tripped shoelace or a dropped ice cream or maybe even an animal acting unpredictably. You do not calculate the risk of a fellow adult weaponizing themselves against your child.
Exactly. I'm looking at the timeline of this flash event. How does a stranger bridge that gap? Monroe asks in the video if the suspect's handlers were watching him, which kind of hints at his background, but fundamentally it exposes how fragile the illusion of public safety really is.
It really does.
If someone decides to just break the social contract in a split second, there's very little a parent can actually do to stop physics.
Right. It completely shatters the perimeter of safety we all just assume exists in broad daylight. And that sudden, violent intrusion into normalcy, that is the exact catalyst for the intense public demand for immediate justice. People need to see the system react swiftly to restore that broken perimeter.
Which brings us to the police response. And this is where the wheels completely fall off the wagon for anyone who is prioritizing strict law and order.
Yeah, this is where it gets incredibly frustrating for a lot of people.
So the 30-year-old stranger was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. That makes sense, right? You throw a kid to crocodiles, you're arrested for attempted murder. But then the police determined he was, quote, unfit for interview.
Right, and the underlying context here is that the suspect was at the zoo as part of a day trip group specifically for the mentally handicapped. So authorities assessed that his learning disabilities or his mental health issues were severe enough that he could not legally be questioned by detectives. The procedural mechanics of the UK justice system dictate that a suspect actually has to comprehend the questions and the implications of their answers.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because of that assessment, he isn't, like, held in a secure psychiatric facility while things get sorted out. He is released on bail.
Yeah.
And not just released for a few weeks or something. He is bailed until September 18th, 2026.
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of that timeline.
It's crazy.
Right, because for context, we are recording this on June 19th, 2026. So that September court date is now just months away for us. But looking at the source material, when Monroe recorded this, he frames this multi-year bail window as a catastrophic failure of the state.
Oh, absolutely.
He sees a suspect in the attempted murder of a vulnerable child essentially walking free for years while the bureaucracy just churns.
Let me push back on the system's logic here, just from an America First centrist perspective on law and order. You're telling me that this 30-year-old was part of a supervised group, which implies he clearly requires management.
Right, someone was supposed to be watching it.
Exactly. He then commits an act of extreme lethal violence against a 3-year-old.
Right.
How does the system justify releasing him back into the public? A threat is a threat. If a dog bites a kid at the park, animal control doesn't, like, give the dog an IQ test before deciding to remove it from the public sphere, right?
No, they don't.
They remove the threat to ensure public safety. So I want you, the listener, to consider the tension here. How does a legal system balance your absolute right to take your family to a zoo in safety with the legal rights of a suspect who is genuinely suffering from severe mental incapacity?
And that is the core centrist law and order argument right there. It highlights a massive philosophical divide in modern jurisprudence. The legal system is attempting to balance the mens rea, the guilty mind or intent, against the physical act itself. So, under the Mental Health Act and the Bail Act, they create this framework where if a person cannot understand their actions, the punitive mechanisms of the state are basically paused.
But the public doesn't care about mens rea when a child is bleeding in a crocodile pit.
Exactly. To your point, they care about the fact that an attempted murderer is, to quote the source, just walking around the streets free as anything. When the system leans so heavily toward accommodating the suspect that they are released back into the community after a horrific crime, it completely degrades public faith in the law.
It feels like the system is gaslighting the public.
It exposes a system that seems to prioritize procedural bureaucracy over the actual physical safety of its citizens. I mean, think about the logical inconsistency here.
Please.
If someone is deemed too impaired to sit in an interview room and just answer questions, how can the state simultaneously deem them stable enough to be bailed back into the general public? That inconsistency is exactly what drives the outrage we see in the source material.
And this massive gap between the horrifying nature of the crime and the perceived leniency of the police response, it leads directly into the final and really the most highly volatile segment of the source material.
Total lack of transparency.
Exactly, because the police response didn't just end with that 2026 bail announcement. They actively urged the public to avoid speculation online, citing, the active criminal investigation.
Right.
And crucially, they withheld the suspect's identity entirely. No name, no photograph, no detailed background. Nothing.
And the YouTuber, Jake Monroe, looks at that silence and concludes it is a deliberate, politically motivated tactic.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that this isn't standard procedure to protect a mentally handicapped individual. He claims it is a strategy used by authorities specifically to protect immigrants and suppress public anger.
And again, we're purely reporting his claims here impartially. But we need to acknowledge the inflammatory rhetoric he uses to fill that silence.
Yeah, it's very extreme.
He claims there is a glaring double standard. His premise is that if the perpetrator were a white man, the police would have released his identity and his face to the media immediately. And because they're withholding the identity, he deduces that the suspect must be a migrant or a Muslim.
Right, and he assumes the state is just waiting for the public attention to fade before quietly confirming it?
Exactly. And he explicitly links the religion of Islam to the suspect's mental handicap group, using some highly offensive Islamophobic stereotypes. He talks about a, quote, 70 IQ Muslim. He uses derogatory terms for traditional headwear, and he even references totally unrelated terror attacks.
Like vehicles being driven into Christmas markets, right?
Yes, to paint this localized zoo incident as part of this broader civilizational threat.
The language is extreme, and it obviously taps into very raw geopolitical anxieties.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we analyze the mechanics of why this specific narrative catches fire rather than just dismissing it outright, we find a really profound lesson about information management.
Especially in a low-trust society, because nature abhors a vacuum.
Yes.
And an information vacuum is arguably the most dangerous kind.
Exactly. When authorities withhold basic facts about a horrific crime, even if their motivation is purely legal, like, adhering to privacy laws for the mentally incapacitated, they create a void. In a high-trust society, the public might say, well, the police have their reasons, let's just wait for the trial.
But we do not live in a high-trust society.
Not even close.
It reminds me of an analogy. Imagine you are in a crowded, noisy room. Suddenly someone walks over and just turns off all the lights.
Oh, I like this.
Complete pitch-black darkness with absolutely no explanation. People don't just stand there calmly waiting for the lights to come back on.
No, they panic.
They instantly panic. They start imagining monsters in the dark. That's what this lack of transparency feels like to the average public. So what does this all mean?
Well, let's take your analogy a step further. It's not just that the lights are off, it's that people in that dark room now have megaphones.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The algorithmic nature of modern media rewards the most sensational, immediate explanation. The authorities turning off the lights by withholding the name and the motive, well, that's intended to keep the room calm and prevent prejudice. But the actual mechanical result is the exact opposite.
Because the authorities are playing by a rule book from, like, 1995. They think that saying no comment will stop the rumor mill. But in reality, their silence is the very thing validating the conspiracy theories.
Exactly.
Monroe's audience looks at the police saying, don't speculate. And what they actually hear is, we are hiding something from you.
From a centrist America First perspective, transparency is the absolute bedrock of governmental legitimacy.
Absolutely.
If citizens feel the state is obscuring facts to engineer public sentiment or to protect certain demographics over others, cynicism just becomes the default setting. The extreme rhetoric used by the source is a direct symptom of this disease. It's a profound distrust in the very institutions that are supposed to maintain order.
Because the public is operating on a framework of basic survival. They see a child thrown to crocodiles. They see a system that catches the guy, shrugs, and says, see you in 2026.
Right.
And then the system refuses to even tell the public who the guy is. To the average citizen, that doesn't look like a sophisticated, nuanced legal process. It looks like the state has completely abandoned its primary duty to protect the innocent.
And it really highlights the danger of prioritizing the rights of the accused to the point of absurdity. The system is bending over backward to accommodate a suspect who is deemed unfit for a simple interview, while entirely ignoring the trauma inflicted on the victim's family.
And the broader community's right to know who is operating in their public spaces.
Exactly. It fundamentally rewrites the social contract.
It does. If I can't trust the police to lock up someone who throws a toddler to apex predators, and I can't trust the police to tell me the truth about what actually happened, why should I trust the police at all?
Right.
That is the dangerous territory we enter when transparency is treated as optional.
It forces alternative media to step in and act as the sense makers. And as we see in this transcript, when alternative media fills the void, The clarity they provide is often heavily filtered through intense cultural and political grievances.
Hmm.
A tragedy at a local zoo instantly bypasses any nuanced discussion about, say, mental health care funding or zoo security perimeters and goes straight to being a referendum on immigration and national identity.
Because the state left the door wide open for that narrative to take hold.
Huh.
Okay, let's bring this all together and distill the key takeaways from the sources we've unpacked today.
Let's do it.
First, we have the sheer physical reality of the event. A toddler survives a terrifying fall into a crocodile enclosure, suffering broken bones but somehow escaping without a single bite, entirely thanks to the heroic, immediate actions of Tracey Johnson.
An absolute miracle, honestly. And second, we have the staggering failure of the justice system's response, especially when viewed through the lens of public safety. An individual arrested for the attempted murder of a child is deemed unfit for interview and then casually released on bail for nearly 3 years.
Until 2026.
Right. It exposes a bureaucratic machine that has seemingly lost touch with the visceral reality of violent crime, which deeply degrades the public's faith in law and order.
And finally, we explored the mechanics of the information vacuum. We saw how the authorities' decision to withhold the suspect's identity, which was intended to suppress prejudice, actually fueled it. The silence was immediately weaponized by the source, filled with highly charged, offensive, anti-migrant speculation. And that proves that in a low-trust society, managing the truth is often much more dangerous than just releasing it.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to ponder. We've seen how institutional silence, even when it's legally mandated, breeds radical speculation and deepens our societal divides. This raises a really important question. Does true public safety require total, unfiltered transparency, even if that transparency guarantees immediate public outrage? Can a democracy actually survive if its citizens fundamentally believe the government is managing the truth rather than sharing it?
That is a heavy question and definitely something to chew on as you navigate the news cycle this week. When you see officials refuse to comment, ask yourself what fills that silence. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some clarity on the mechanics of how a local tragedy becomes a national flashpoint.
It's a complicated one for sure.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to PoliticallyX so you never miss a deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep demanding the lights be turned back on.